In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you how to create a neat intro using the tools built into Adobe Premiere Elements version 13. I did do this in a previous version of Elements, but the interface has changed so much. Some people were asking comments on where do you do the things that you do. So all I'm going to do is create a neat little intro where you have some lens flare that dances across the screen and some intro that kind of fades in and fades out. So what we're going to do is create an intro with some black video. So go to the project assets and add a new item, black video, and take the default, whatever that is, good enough for me, maybe 5-6 seconds, something like that. Intros should be short anyway. So obviously if I play this thing, it's going to be nice and boring, and we don't want that. Let's go ahead and add some text to it. So a couple ways you can do it. You can add a title up here, or you can add a title with the titles and text at the very bottom of the screen. I'm just used to the project assets folder, so that's what I'm going to do. And let's type in, say, intro. And maybe we will align this thing vertically, horizontally. Actually, we should make it a little bit bigger so I can see it. And align that in. Good enough for right now. Let's make the length a little bit shorter here by grabbing the ends of that title in. So obviously if I play this thing, it's going to be super boring, show you the introduction, and not have a whole lot of flash or dazzle to it. All right, so let's go ahead and add a lens flare. So let's select, you don't have to select anything really. Let's go ahead to Effects, and on the Show All, there's a Generate Category and Lens Flare. We'll just drag it right on top of that black video, and it will add a lens flare. And I'm not going to mess with the defaults right now. In fact, let me just collapse that so you don't think there's any smoke and mirrors here. Let's go ahead and play this. And okay, that looks cute, but it's a static image and it's very boring. So let's go back to this blue video, or this black video, I should say, the light blue thing on video 1. Go to the Applied Effects and notice how you have the lens flare. Now, most likely this won't be expanded by default here because I've got this Show Hide Keyframe Controls on. That's the way I last had it. It's probably how you're going to see your interface here. You can toggle it with that little stopwatch looking device. And you can also make things, you can move your timeline around just by dragging this little timeline around up here. So basically what this timeline does is it allows you to change each of these settings and remember them at any point in time. So this little timeline here is just for the selected clip. So as I move it back and forth, you can see how the other timeline adjusts as well. So let's go ahead and make some changes here. Let's change the lens flare brightness to, say, 0 at the very beginning. And at the very end, or near the middle of it, I want to get bright, and at the end I want to go back to 0. So how you remember that is this little stopwatch here, this toggle animation, as you turn it on for that lens flare brightness, and it remembers that 0%. Then we're going to go over to the middle somewhere, I don't know, here, wherever, and we're going to crank the lens flare brightness up to, I don't know, something not too annoying, 138%, and then go to a little bit more towards the end and change it back to, say, 0%. So then what happens here is as the timeline goes on, the lens flare brightness gets brighter, and there's sort of a crescendo effect, and then it goes back down to 0. So if you play that in real time, you can see that it's still kind of static, but at least it has a little bit more of a pop to it. All right, so as you can imagine, any of these settings can be changed over the time of that clip, like the flare center, lens type, blend with original. So my favorite thing to do is adjust the flare center. So let's go ahead and make sure this is the very beginning and toggle the flare center on, so that what we want it to do is maybe start up at the top of the frame, then kind of swoop around to kind of give some neat little effect to this very, very boring static lens flare. So how you can do this, you can play with these numbers here if you want to, or right up here by lens flare, if you, that little drop down group expanding triangle, if you click next to it, you get this little dot up here. And that is actually where that point was. So now that it's highlighted, as I move my cursor around, you can see that that's the center point of this thing. So let's move our cursor somewhere around near the end and drag this dot over there. And unfortunately, you don't know if you're dragging the front or the beginning, which I drug the ends. Let's just take these and move them around. Chances of you accidentally, inadvertently selecting something and getting out of that mode are very, very common. So just make sure you sort of select it by clicking over here in this space. There's no button there, but at least there isn't on my monitor. That's at least how you get into it. Now that when you dance your cursor back and forth, you can see how it sort of moves around and gives you some better kind of an animated effect. Now that may not be very, very pretty there. So let's go ahead and let's drag this front point up, the end point around. And if you notice these little teeny dots here, if you drag those, it changes the path. It adds a little bit of a curvature to it. The other way that you could have done this is add just a bunch more points somewhere in space or on your screen to get it to kind of follow those points that you've selected. I just like to grab these little endpoints, give some kind of a neat little effect here. So now that of course we did it wrong. We drag the front up here and the back down here. I wish they had a S or an F start and a finish listed on these little endpoints here, but that's okay. Just quick dragging, move them around, and we got what we want. Oops, undo that. Sometimes I accidentally grab the wrong thing here and move my screen. So here we go. So let's go ahead and play this thing and see if it looks any better. All right, a little bit better. I mean, we could tweak this thing all day long and get it to do all kinds of neat things, but I think you get the idea on how to adjust the timeline. And click this little magic area up here to get your lens flare to show up. All right, now that we have that, let's go ahead and play with this text to get it to look a little bit better. Text just sitting in the screen here is kind of boring. So what we're going to do is select the title O2 part on the timeline, and notice how it has some applied effects, motion and opacity. So let's go ahead and change the opacity. And as you would imagine, at this point in time, make sure your little stopwatch is on. We'll change its opacity to 0, and maybe somewhere around that crescendo there, if you will. Let's change its opacity to 100, and then maybe back down to, say, 0. All right, so now what happens is after we play our little video, you can see how it, the intro kind of fades from nothing into something and then goes back to nothing. Now, if you've ever right-clicked on a track and hit the fade and the unfade, this is exactly what it's doing. It's just adding these little fade in and fade out markers. If you want to see what that looks like, just expand the video too, and you can see how I have these little keyframes here on the for the animation. So there's another little tool over here that you can use. If you really want it to fade in much faster, you can add a keyframe here and drag this keyframe up to, say, 100%. And then it comes in and stays illuminated or full opacity. Then it kind of gradually goes away. So it's just a couple different ways that you can play with these keyframes here. Now maybe I wanted to start with nothing at the very beginning and then turn on. So again, just another way that you can play with the opacity setting. My personal favorite is just to use the effects up here, just because that's what I've been kind of trained myself to use. All right, something else I always like to do is let's get rid of the opacity. Let's go to the motion on our text, and I always like to have the text start off maybe a little bit smaller, maybe 80% or something, then get larger up to, say, 100% or whatever. I don't know, pick a number, any number, and then maybe have it just very slightly get a teeny bit larger. That way it's got just a small amount of animation to it. So you can see the text get larger, come into opacity, and then it just kind of fades out. So just a few minutes, we've created a neat little intro. Now if you want to add some more stuff to it, you can add some sound. Just go to your project assets, pick your very favorite soundtrack, drag it to the soundtrack track, and you can add some sound that way. Now I personally don't like the sound coming on immediately, so let me just move this over a little bit And notice how I have the soundtrack expanded so I can see the wave. If you click in here and drag, you can expand your waveform a lot bigger so you can see things a lot easier. Now, when you select your track, lo and behold, you have these little keyframes here, so you can add or remove a keyframe, and then you can control the sound that way. So maybe right around here, I want to have a sort of a crescendo, so I want it to get real loud and then get quiet. So let's go to the very end of this thing, add a keyframe, and just drag the volume all the way down to nothing. Not that one. Not that one. Where's my little keyframe? Just like that. All right, so now what's going to happen, you're going to see everything sort of come into to view. You're going to get the music a little bit louder, and then boom, everything goes away. Now, this may not be the best audio track to do this with, but you get the idea on what you can do with things. A couple other things, just one last thing. Let's go ahead and select the black video, select our applied effects, and notice how I have all of these, the lens flare brightness and the lens flare center sort of too far from the end. If you don't like that, you can drag these things around wherever you want, or you can fence select, click down the mouse button and move things all simultaneously. And what that does is that just simply changes the timing on when your lens flare actually happens. So if you want to bring in your clip length, make it a little bit shorter, that's how you can kind of control how how fast these things come in and come out of your timeline. Of course, you could even change things like the lens type, and I have no idea what this is going to look like. Probably pretty goofy, but that's okay. We're playing around here, right? So somewhere around here, the crescendo, let's change the lens type to, I don't know, 35mm prime. And then maybe near the end, go to 105mm prime, whatever. And let's just see what that looks like. Yeah, to each his own. Anyway, that's kind of a way that you can create intros using tools right out of Adobe Premiere Elements in Elements version 13. That's all I had to show you here. Stick around. I'll have more videos on Elements 13. Thanks for watching.